Hello! Today we're going to focus on economic value chains for housing construction and housing rental activities in an economy. An economic value chain is a statistical representation of a particular activity and its upstream and downstream links with other sectors of that economy, both as suppliers of intermediate inputs and as customers for the output of that activity. When we think of housing construction, we typically focus only on the construction activity itself, whether it be pouring foundations, laying bricks, plastering, roofing, plumbing, or electrical work. But in a formal construction context, a housing contractor or construction company typically coordinates these activities using factor inputs from labor, capital, land, and entrepreneurial skills to add value to raw materials and other inputs from their suppliers. Each of these factor inputs is paid, and the combined value of these payments constitutes the gross value added of the construction activity. Governments often impose indirect taxes and subsidize certain activities. As a result, the price paid by consumers differs from what is received by producers. We therefore need to take indirect taxes and subsidies into account. To build a house requires many different intermediate inputs from suppliers located in other sectors of the economy. These range from sand, stone and timber to brick, cement and reinforcing, windows and doors, glass, tiles and electrical and plumbing fittings. There are also service inputs from architects, quantity surveyors, engineers, accountants and lawyers, as well as transport, communication and banking services. For simplicity, we generally group these intermediate inputs into primary sector inputs, secondary sector inputs and tertiary sector inputs in accordance with the standard industrial classification system. Primary sectors include agriculture, forestry and fishing, and mining and quarrying. The secondary sectors are manufacturing, utilities and construction, and the tertiary sectors comprise trade, catering and accommodation, transport and communication, finance, insurance, real estate and business services, and community, social and personal services. The classification system used by each country can vary. When we add together the value of the intermediate inputs used in housing construction in a particular economy and the gross value added by housing contractors in a particular period, we get the value of domestically produced housing. In other sectors, this could be supplemented by imports and reduced by exports of products. But this is not typically a feature of housing construction, as completed houses usually don't move across international borders. Complete knockdown kit houses would be an exception, but these are not common. In the housing construction and rental contexts, this means that only domestic production is available to meet domestic demand. In most economic value chains, domestic demand could consist of intermediate demand, where the output of one sector becomes an intermediate input into another economic value chain. However, in the housing construction economic value chain, all demand is classified as final demand. In terms of the national accounts, all housing construction is classed as gross capital formation. Completed houses are included in gross fixed capital formation and would be added to the stock of housing in that country, while houses still under construction would be accounted for in inventory changes. A completed economic value chain allows us to examine a particular activity, such as housing construction, from many different perspectives. It can provide insights into the ratio of intermediate inputs to gross value added in the value of domestic production. This is essentially the direct multiplier effect of housing construction on the economy. So we can then estimate the extent to which activity in other sectors of the economy will be stimulated or depressed by increased or reduced housing construction activity. We can also assess the impact of housing construction on upstream intermediate supplier sectors and industries. Based on the ratio of intermediate inputs and gross value added to domestic production, it is possible to calculate the direct multiplier effect of housing construction in an economy. In Rwanda, for example, increased spending of 1 billion Rwandan francs on construction activity resulted in additional sales of 1.86 billion Rwandan francs in upstream supply industries in 2017. If the necessary data is available, we can also estimate what proportion of these intermediate inputs is imported from other countries. This could be useful in assessing the potential economic impact of localizing the production of particular construction materials, or in determining the balance of payments implications of new housing construction strategies and programs. We can also assess the composition of factor incomes that are generated. How much is defined as labor remuneration and what goes to profit, interest and rent? If we know what aggregate spending on labor remuneration linked to housing construction was, and there is data on average hourly, monthly or annual remuneration in construction, we can also estimate how many employment opportunities are directly supported by housing construction. The nature of housing construction in a particular economy will also impact the composition of the gross value added. Where most housing is incrementally built using informal contractors supervised by the owner, the informal contractor may be treated as the owner of their business for statistical purposes, and income paid to them would be classed as gross operating surplus rather than labor remuneration. So far, we have focused our attention on the housing construction economic value chain. But once they're built and occupied, houses continue to generate a stream of income. This gives rise to a housing rental economic value chain. In many African countries, the pace at which people are migrating to urban areas is accelerating. The majority of these new arrivals in cities do not have the financial resources to purchase their own homes and are therefore either forced to rent or they choose to do so because it offers them greater flexibility. When accommodation is rented out, it generates rental incomes for its owner, but also necessitates that the owner incur various costs. The intermediate input purchases associated with renting out accommodation could range from maintenance spending to gardening services, security, and payments to managing agents and lawyers, in addition to many others. For those people that choose to occupy the houses that they own, there is also an implicit rental payment that should be included in the calculation estimates of that country's gross domestic product. This should be estimated by the rent that is asked for equivalent accommodation in the same or similar areas, but to do so requires well-developed and extensive housing rental markets to determine accurately. A completed house has the potential to generate an income stream until it is demolished or abandoned. The scale and economic impact of both explicit and implicit housing rental activities are therefore determined by the cumulative stock of housing, not just the new houses that are built. As a result, housing rentals' contribution to the economy will tend to increase over time, and in countries with higher urbanization rates will tend to match or even exceed the contribution of housing construction activities to the economy. As these rental activities become more formalized, the value and range of intermediate inputs required will also increase. I believe that when we start to view and understand housing construction and rental activities as part of economic value chains, we get a much more comprehensive and nuanced view of their importance to an economy. This can assist us in developing more effective housing and even industrial policies. One of the key challenges we face in constructing an economic value chain is getting the necessary data. This course has an additional reading available that explains the data requirements and where data is typically sourced from. There are also additional readings that will enable you to deepen your understanding of various aspects of the housing economic value chain methodology and its application to various African countries.